5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Up short.
Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of the One Puck Short podcast. My guest this week is a writer for the Hockey News. Please welcome Mr. Matt Larkin to the show. Hi Matt, how are you?
Hi Rob, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. The conference semifinals are well underway now. Calgary stay alive with an overtime win against the Ducks last night. Johnny Hockey scores with 20 seconds to go on the power play and Michael Backlund grabs the winner in overtime. Are the Flames still in this, or is this just a bump in the road for an Anaheim team that's been pretty impressive during this postseason?
Oh, I'm sorry, Flames fans, but I do think it's a bump in the road. You know, we were talking about it in the office today, and we sort of likened the series to almost like an adult playing against a child. And it almost literally looks like that when you look at Johnny Hockey and TJ Brodie. You know, this is not a very big team on the ice. Yuri Hudler against guys like Ryan Kessler, Ryan Getzlaf. You can see that it seems like the Ducks forwards, they have their way with Calgary, you know, whether it's matchup against Sean Monahan or the defense. They're just so physically dominant, and it seems like they're able to control the play. And Calgary, you know, for the advanced stats fans out there, you know, they don't generate as many shot attempts as their opponents do, and that trend has not changed. It's not changed in the playoffs. They're still getting dominated. So I do think that last night will be a bit of a wake-up call for the Ducks. I think the Ducks are going to really step on Calgary's throat in Game 4. It'll be very interesting to see if Anaheim comes out very quickly and gets an early goal. Yeah,
you mentioned Getzlaf and Perry. They're the leading point scorers in the postseason. Corey Perry is the highest with 14 points. Getzlaf has 12, but Ryan Kessler's played really well. Matt Bolesky has 3 goals, I think, in the last 3 games now. And the depth the Ducks have is starting to show through. Frederik Andersen looks pretty comfortable most of the time back there. The defense hasn't been overly troubled. Again, as you said, they're physically able to handle what the Flames are throwing at them.
Well, it's very interesting, too, because there's a bit of a knock or a potential knock on the Ducks defense going into the playoffs. When you look at guys like Cam Fowler and Sammy Vatanen, Hampus Lindholm, they're all very young, and they're not physically overly imposing guys. So there's sort of a notion that, okay, if they face a team that can sort of really push them on the forecheck, maybe they can be overwhelmed. And people thought that might have happened with Winnipeg, which is why a lot of people, more people than expected, were picking Winnipeg to beat Anaheim or at least give them a tough run. But Calgary, you know, for all the good things Calgary does, it's not a team that wins by intimidation and aggressive forechecking, other than, I guess, Michael Ferland is sort of giving them that element they haven't had in the past. But I just think that Anaheim is a nightmare matchup for Calgary every possible way you slice it.
Yeah, and you mentioned guys like Cam Fowler. They've got great mobility, which kind of cancels out what guys like Monahan and Godjo bring to the table, because their speed was an asset to the Flames. It's kind of counteracted with guys like Cam Fowler back there.
It's a great point. I love that point. And especially, you know, look at Bob Hartley and what he's gotten out of his blue line this year. He really loves to let them go. You look at TJ Brodie and Mark Giordano before he got injured, and Chris Russell, Dennis Weidman. These guys can skate, and Bob Hartley doesn't mind them joining the rush. But it's interesting because Anaheim has such mobility in their back end. They can counterattack very quickly.
We both seem to be in agreement. We think the Ducks are going to come through this semi-final. It looks like Chicago will win out as well and reach the conference final yet again. They've been absolutely dominant against a Minnesota team, which was very impressive against the Blues. I had the Blues down to win the Cup, and Minnesota just manhandled them at times. But they've kind of come up against the Chicago team in great form right now.
Oh, it's been amazing. I'm really, you know, Chicago going to the playoffs, obviously seeing Patrick Kane come back from his broken collarbone, they're going to be formidable. But I think somehow we've still underestimated how good this Chicago team can be when it's firing in all cylinders. And Minnesota just looks extremely overmatched right now. And Chicago's depth is really coming through, and the Wild can't generate offense. And to me, the biggest problem, we see Ryan Suter. To me, I don't remember the last time I saw Suter looking this bad. And, you know, it's not necessarily all his fault. I just don't think he has the help right now. It might come eventually. If you look at a guy like Matthew Dumba, he's a very highly regarded prospect, and I think he's going to get there. And Jonas Brodin has a very bright future. So the Wild's blue line, long term, I think they're still in good shape. But right now, Suter does not have proper support in the form of a top 4 blue liner to just take a little pressure off and get a little physical with respect to guys like Marco Scandella, Jared Spurgeon, those types. They're not true top 4 guys. They're more top 6 guys. And I think for that reason, the Wild's defense in particular looks very overwhelmed. Nobody can handle Patrick Kane. I mean, I guess no one ever can handle Patrick Kane, but it's very clear with the Wild right now.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Ryan Suter's struggling, I think is maybe the word, but his, I call it opposite number, Duncan Keith's been phenomenal. He's been great form. He's playing 29 minutes a night the same as Suda, but the difference is almost night and day. As you said, Reinster's not had a great series, but he's not getting a lot of support either, and that's where guys like Johnny Oduya come in, Seabrook, Hjalmarsson. It's surprising to me how easily they seem to have handled the Wild, especially given on paper what's been a strong blue line, a strong offense, and Devin Dubnyk's been great for them since arriving in January.
Well, it's very interesting, and I'm glad you brought up Dubnyk. One thing I've noticed in this series, we were talking about this in the Hockey News office today as well, is that it looked like people would have argued that Minnesota had the goaltending advantage going into this series.
Yeah.
You look at the way Corey Crawford played. The poor guy, he doesn't get respect. I call him the Rodney Dangerfield of goaltending. He just can't. He wins a cup. It doesn't seem to matter, and because he does, he has the propensity to let in the soft goal here and there. And obviously he got the hook for Scott Darling in the series, and Devin Dubnyk was amazing. Vezina Trophy finalist. The big reason why Minnesota is where it is now. But in this series, we're noticing a few things. For one, it looks like Corey Crawford's regaining his confidence, and he is a veteran goalie. He's played in lots of Game 7s, many Game 7s. He's won a Stanley Cup, so it shouldn't be that big of a surprise to see him with Steely resolve. We saw him make an amazing save on Michael Granlund last night on a breakaway with his blocker, and that's a veteran goalie save. That's a poised goalie save. And on the other hand, Devin Dubnyk, you worry, right? I think he started. Didn't he start every one of Minnesota's games, or almost every single one of Minnesota's games down the stretch?
38 in a row he started.
38 in a row, and a couple of the goals you're seeing him get beat through his 5-hole, a few little goals that they're not absolute stinkers, but they're shots that maybe he should have, and you wonder if it's a little bit of a house of cards where the fatigue is catching up to him, and maybe he was playing a bit over his head. Yeah,
you mentioned Crawford, who's didn't have the best start to the postseason. You mentioned he was pulled for Scott Darling. They put him back in for this series, and he's been great. A lot of people think he should have won the Conn Smythe in 2013 when the Hawks won the Cup. I can't say I disagree with those notions. And just the way this whole team seems to have hit its stride. You look at the top 10 scorers. Kane's in there, who's a phenomenal talent. Taves, again, brings it in the playoffs. Keith's the 5th highest scorer in the playoffs. Patrick Sharp's in the mix. Marian Hossa has been exceptional, as Marian Hossa tends to be in the playoffs now. I mean, there was a time when he was the guy you couldn't win with. Now it's like you can't win without him.
That's right. It's so true. It's so true. Once he broke that curse with Pittsburgh and Detroit, then he did it. How many years in a row was he in the final? 3 years in a row, and he finally did it. And since then, he became almost a rabbit's foot. Now everywhere he goes, he wins. And I think that just all those names you're listing off there, it's a testament to Chicago's supreme depth. And this is not depth in the form of good pluggers that can play on the third line. Those are excellent all-star caliber forwards, and you can spread them out of Chicago's top 2 or 3 lines even. And it's almost unfair when you see a guy like Marian Hossa or even an Antoine Vermette playing on your third or fourth line. Tuvo Teravainen, Brian Bickle, Andrew Shaw. Those are great guys to round out the top 9, top 12 forwards. Chicago is just so deep, and Minnesota is talented at forward as well, but it seems like they don't have the same ceiling. And Zach Parise is the one guy that plays at that level, but Thomas Vanek has not been what the Wild hoped he'd be since he came and signed with his pseudo hometown team. He seems to disappear in the playoffs, and you have guys like Nino Niederreiter that have a lot of potential, and Charlie Coyle. The Wild have a deep forward core, but they're not at that level. They're not that level of experience and just high-end play that Chicago has. And I just think that lack of depth is really shining through right now.
We focused on how the Hawks have done pretty damn well against Minnesota. Tampa Bay have surprised me in how easily almost they've handled Montreal. I mean, Game 1 went to double overtime, but there was always a feeling the Lightning had that kind of under control, and then they blew the Habs out in Game 2. There's back-to-back games in Tampa tonight and tomorrow. They could sweep the Canadiens. I never thought I'd say that.
Well, that's right, and this is one where we can proudly say that this is one we did predict. Tampa Bay was our Stanley Cup pick to start these playoffs. We think they're the total package. They've got supreme forward depth, and as I said, arguably the best line. When you factor in defensive play as well, Nikita Kucherov, Tyler Johnson, and Andre Palat, probably the best all-around line in hockey this year. And they can almost function as Tampa Bay's second line because you have Steven Stamkos on the other line. So this team's got amazing forward depth, and it added in the offseason. It added guys that are built for playoff hockey, built for wars. Brian Boyle's just a giant. He's good on faceoffs. He's good defensively. He can mix it up. And the trades they made, acquiring Jason Garrison and getting Braden Coburn at the trade deadline, they didn't bear fruit right away because Coburn was hurt, obviously, and Garrison too. But now all of a sudden they're adding great depth to a blue line that already has Victor Hedman. So this team's got a little bit of everything. And a lot of people were worried about Ben Bishop's experience heading into the playoffs. But as I've been saying about him all along, is you're not experienced until you're experienced. You look at Patrick Dubois in 1986. He wasn't experienced, and then he was. Right? right? And now Ben Bishop suddenly, he wasn't 2 weeks ago, but he is now. He's a Game 7 winner. So the deeper Tampa Bay goes in these playoffs, I think the less, in a way, we can worry about that sort of inexperience hurting Ben Bishop. And on the Montreal side of things, this is a team that was over-reliant on Carey Price all year. They didn't generate very many shot attempts compared to a lot of the other playoff teams. I think they were the lowest scoring of any team to make the playoffs. And aside from Max Pacioretty, they don't have that go-to sniper that they can really count on in clutch situations.
You mentioned Ben Bishop there, and he had a couple of wobbles in the first round, but he looks really confident now, as if those nerves have kind of settled. He got through the first round. He's playing exceptionally well over the last 2 or 3 games. He's got a .933 save percentage. He's given up less than 2 goals a game. And if you're giving up less than 2 goals a game, you're giving your team a pretty damn good chance to win.
That's right, especially when the team you're playing has trouble scoring 2 goals a game, right? So it's doubly effective. And to me, it was Game 7. You never would have expected it, but Game 7 against Detroit, watching Bishop, I thought, something's changed here. You looked at his lateral movement, he was very silky smooth, side to side. I just thought he wasn't overplaying any shot. And to me, that's a sign of a confident goaltender. I think it seems like he's turned a corner. You never know, because even in the context of one game, in the course of one game, I was thinking that, and then he gives up that softie that sent the game to overtime last week. But still, it seems like those lapses are getting they're less frequent now.
Yeah, and through all this, we haven't even mentioned guys like Ryan Callahan, who came in obviously last season, who's another guy you would say generally is built to play in the postseason. Anton Stralman's been great again. How underrated is Anton Stralman in the wider landscape?
Oh, he's extremely underrated. I think that it was a great signing from the start for Tampa Bay. And I guess, the Rangers, their blue line is loaded as well because of trading and signing. But otherwise, I think they would say they miss Anton Stralman. He just does everything well. He doesn't do anything exceptionally well, but he's great in the possession game. And he's not an overly physical defender, but he skates well enough. He's great in coverage. And he reminds me a bit of Marc-Edouard Vlasic in San Jose, in that I compare him to, football, American football. A cornerback, and that he's good defensively with his coverage and positioning, as opposed to being physical, and that's a very effective thing in the modern NHL when you have a lot more smaller players that can be effective and get more ice time and a lot of speed in the game.
Yeah, and the scary thing with the Bolts for me is this is quite a young team in general. There's a couple of guys, Garrison's a little older, but in general terms, this is still a very young core group. Anthony DeAngelo just won the OHL D-Man of the Year. So that's a great prospect they've got coming through the pipeline. So when guys like Garrison do move on, and Coburn perhaps as well, they've got these great kids. This is a team that could be really strong for several years.
That's right. And when you look at Anthony DeAngelo, he's a very high ceiling kid. He's extremely high scoring defenseman, and he's a guy that Tampa Bay is deep enough. They have the luxury of developing him slowly. Same with Andrei Vasilevsky, arguably the best goaltending prospect in the world. But this Tampa team is so loaded, they don't have to rush these guys. Even Jonathan Drouin, they were able to keep him back a year, and this year they were able to play him, more on the third line because they're so deep. So these outstanding young prospects at various positions, they're not being asked to do too much too soon. And I love the connection to the AHL with this team. If you look, they were the Norfolk Admirals a few years ago. They won, I think it was 28 games in a row. And guys like Tyler Johnson, Andre Palat, Alex Killorn were on that team. The coach of that team was John Cooper. So they really gelled, and they played in high-pressure situations a while ago. And it seems like they've been coming along together. They're all still young, and it's no wonder they have such good chemistry. Yeah, I mean,
this postseason feels like Tyler Johnson's coming out party. He's 24. A lot of people would have looked at him on paper, 5'8", 183 pounds, nothing particularly special about that. A lot of people say he's undersized, but he's got such great speed. He leads the playoffs with 7 goals. He's had a great season. He had 72 points in 77 games. I mean, this is a guy that is stepping out of Steven Stamkos' shadow almost.
It's so true, and it just seems like he's a real difference maker. He has game-breaking speed, like you said, and to me, he's not, you wouldn't call him a tough player per se, in that he's not dishing out the physical punishment, but he's a guy who's not afraid to take the physical punishment, and that can be just as important if you're a player who's relied on for offense as well. You look at a guy like Pavel Datsyuk at Detroit, and it's similar in that he's got great speed. Datsyuk's not an overly big guy, but he's always willing to play in the dangerous situations, and it's hard. You can't knock him off the puck, and you can't really intimidate him, and Tyler Johnson seems to have that quality as well for a guy, in these playoffs. You'd think you'd see him getting knocked around left and right, and he has been knocked around a little bit, but he just keeps getting back up, and I think he's got the sort of mental fortitude to keep going and keep using that speed, and he's got a great shot too.
Yeah, the final matchup in the East is the Rangers and the Capitals. Now, the Caps took a narrow win to take the series lead. Braden Holtby was superb. He's played 81 games this season, which is mind-boggling to me. But he doesn't look like slowing down at all. I love the Caps' depth. This series is shaping up to be a quite an interesting contest, I think, because the Rangers, to me, they weren't hurried enough against the Pens, and now it seems like they can't find that extra gear to hurry the Capitals themselves.
That's right, and they have to find it soon because Washington was a team, and the Rangers were the consensus Cup favorite. Even if you look at the betting odds, things like that. Yep. But Washington was my favorite sleeper team to make a deep run in the Cup because I see them as very built for the playoffs. They got such a deep defense. Mike Green is there. Mike Green might not be what he was, but he's their fifth defenseman, and that shows how deep. And Brooks Orpik and Matt Niskanen. Sure, Brian McClellan might regret those signings in 2 or 3 years, but right now in the short term, it makes them absolutely tougher to play against. And you got John Carlson, Carl Alzner. That's a very deep blue line, which can really cancel out what the Rangers had, which is arguably the deepest blue line in the entire playoffs. And Washington, obviously, you have your Alex Ovechkin, Nicklas Backstrom, your Evgeny Kuznetsov, but you've got a lot of size. Guys like Troy Brouwer, he's a big body, and it hurts when he hits you. Same with Tom Wilson. So it's punishing to play them. And Braden Holtby, you have to think it's the Mitch Korn effect, the goalie guru who came from Nashville that Barry Trotz brought over. I think he lives in his car, and he's very different in his methods, his training methods, but he seems to have had this magical effect. And Holtby was, he was a good goalie to begin with, but it seems like we've gotten a much more consistent Braden Holtby. And, Holtby might have been a team that, a year ago was, we can keep Washington in the game and he's not going to lose games for Washington. But now Holtby's going to win games for Washington. He's become that much of an asset. And that's a big problem for the Rangers. I was looking at their stats today and I couldn't believe it. Of the 16 teams to make the playoffs, the Rangers are 15th in goals per game. So they're below all the eliminated teams except for the one they eliminated, Pittsburgh.
You mentioned Braden Holtby. I know before the season began, Kevin Woodley from In Goal Magazine joined me on the podcast, and he was the guy Kevin picked out to bounce back, and I wholeheartedly agreed with him at the time. We thought him and maybe Cam Ward in Carolina would have bounce back years just because they were working with new goalie coaches, obviously Mitch Korn, as you mentioned, and the consensus seems to be that Korn and Trotz have let Braden Holtby kind of play his natural game again, whereas Adam Oates wanted him to be a little bit more contained and a little bit more structured. Trotz and Korn have let Holtby have this kind of rhythm-based game, which not every goalie coach likes because you can get too attached to it, and during poor runs of form, you end up out of position and all sorts of things. But that doesn't seem to have happened with Braden Holtby, and that's not a bad time to produce these kind of performances when you've got a contract up in the summer.
Absolutely. I think he's due for quite a nice raise, and it's a good point about letting him get into his own rhythm. I think more than any other position, goaltending is a mental thing. It's about a mental rhythm and concentration, and whatever's working for Holtby, they've let him get back to it. And I think the same applies to Alex Ovechkin as well. And I talked to Barry Trotz in the summer about Ovechkin. I was writing a story about, how to quote-unquote fix him and make him defensively better. And one thing that Trotz stressed to me was, he said, listen, I'd love to make him more of a two-way player. I'd love to do what Scotty Bowman did with Steve Yzerman and turn him into a guy who can score but also be good defensively. But he said, I want to make one thing clear. I still want Alex Ovechkin to score 50 goals. I'm not going to put a muzzle on him. I'm not going to put the shackles on him, I should say. I want him to still be a dynamic offensive player. And it seems like that's rung true this year.
Yeah, for sure. He's got 4 goals and 8 points in 10 games and has formed a deadly partnership with Nicklas Backstrom. It kind of trailed off a little bit for a couple of years under Dale Hunter and Adam Oates, but those guys at the top of that spearhead, it's just incredible how well they play together. And we've mentioned guys like Troy Brouwer. Joel Ward is in there as well because Netsov's been great. I thought the Caps would go all the way to the final, and there was a couple of moments against the Islanders where I wondered if it was the same old Washington, but they came back well, came back strong against the Islanders team with a lot to play for, to be fair, with the Coliseum shutting down. And right now, they look real strong. They look really impressive. This looks like the first Washington team where you would genuinely put money on them to go all the way.
That's right, and I think we're getting close to seeing Ovechkin and Barry Trotz in their first ever conference final, and I think that's why if I'm a Rangers fan, you don't want to say panic, but you want to say wake up, say you cannot afford a misstep against this team. This team is very legit, and I think against the Islanders, I look at the Tom Wilson hit on Lubomir-Visnovsky. I think that changed the course of the series. Personally, I think it was a clean hit. Not everyone agrees, but I think Visnovsky if you looked at the replay, he deliberately stepped into Wilson's path, not to hit him, but to impede him. So I don't know what Wilson was supposed to do. And I think the Islanders were a distracted team the rest of that series. They were focused on revenge instead of winning games. And I worry that Montreal is getting into the same situation, not about revenge for a certain hit, but in terms of losing focus. And, the fingers are being pointed at the referees 2 games in a row for 2 different things. And to me, that's a sign of a team that's mentally on the verge of breaking.
I definitely agree with you about the distraction, certainly for the Islanders. I thought the call on the ice was correct on Wilson. It was charging, and I was fine with that. And that was pretty much where it stayed and should have stayed, in my opinion. But yeah, the Islanders absolutely got distracted. They got caught up in the moment. There was all sorts of strange quotes in the media. And again, I can agree with what you're saying about the Habs. Obviously, stuff with Brandon Proust, who got fined $5,000 for his comments about Brad Watson. And you kind of don't want the Rangers to fall into that same trap where they get distracted by what certain guys are doing or what's going on around them. Because, as you said, this is the opportunity for Trotz and Ovechkin to make their first conference final. And Ovi is the kind of guy, if he smells blood, he's going to go for it.
I think it's true, absolutely true. And I think it's true of any team. When they're sort of pointing fingers, it's a sign that they're worried. And I wrote about this with Montreal this week, and it reminds me of what happened to them 2 years ago. Again, in the series with Ottawa, they lost in 5 games, and you see where the house of cards came tumbling down. Paul McLean started making comments. He blamed the hit Eric Greiba on Lars Eller. He blamed it on Montreal's own defenseman Rafael Diaz. Brandon Prust was there again, calling him a fat walrus. And then 2 games later, there was more than 200 penalty minutes in the game, and Montreal got blown out. And it just seemed like at the time they were more of a finesse team, and Ottawa was the brute team, and they let Ottawa draw them into the Ottawa style of play. And I worry, it's not quite the same situation with Tampa Bay, but it's still a case of a team just getting beaten mentally, it seems.
Yeah, moving away from the playoffs, a major change in the front office in New Jersey this week. Lou Lamoriello, for the first time since 1987, won't be, the helm. He's still president of the Devils organization. But Ray Shero takes over as general manager. Of course, Shero had a lot of success in Pittsburgh, won a cup. It's a big shift for the Devils. It's one I personally think they've needed for a while. You've got to respect what Lou Lamoriello did there, but this was a team that, to me, seemed to be running out of ideas, and I think this is the right time to make that change.
I absolutely think it's the right time as well. And, for one reason, and Lou was open about this, he's in his early 70s now. He's not getting any younger. Yeah. So I think, the day-to-day minutiae of the job can be very grinding. So I think it's good for him to pass the torch. And the other thing, we can't prove this, but reading between the lines, maybe Lou realizes that the entire team needs a fresh start, and that includes him and a fresh mind sort of looking at the hockey decisions. And if you look at this team, I think it's a very incomplete roster. And the Devils, I think their blue line is excellent. Their blue line future is excellent. They've amassed many prospects: Eric Jelena, Damon Severson, John Merrill, Adam Larson. That's a big list. Steve Santini, and obviously they're set with Corey Schneider in goal. But no team has a bleaker future in terms of their forward core. They've got this sort of ragtag group. And I spoke to Lou in the summer, and he admitted, he said that he signed Martin Havlat and re-upped Jaromir Jagr. He was hoping for the Czech connection, and Merrick Sidlicki on the team as well. Yeah. That was the plan. He was genuinely hoping to sort of find some chemistry there. It didn't work out, and they sort of had this island of misfit toys of veterans, Damian Brunner and unfortunately Ryan Clough with the injuries, the concussion problems. But in terms of forwards in the pipeline for this team, Hockey News, we have Future Watch magazine, special edition, where we have a scouting panel composed of executives, GMs, scouts, and they rank every farm system in the NHL, and the Devils ranked last. And you look at their top forward prospects, Stefan Matteau and John Quenneville, and they might be decent NHLers, but those are not guys that are going to be winning scoring titles anytime soon. And luckily, the Devils have a chance to sort of kickstart a new era. They have a high enough draft position. Maybe they can get someone like a Mitch Marner, a very dynamic offensive player that might fall to them, or a Matthew Barzal. They need someone who's completely of a completely different ilk. They have enough grinders. They have enough defensemen, and Ray Shero, the teams that Ray Shero built were very good offensive teams. It's hard to say. Is he the right hire? I'm not sure yet. There's certain things he did well. He was a very aggressive trader. He made some excellent trades. He got Marian Hossa, and they were 2 wins away from a cup that year. He made the Ryan Whitney trade, and Ryan Whitney was a very highly regarded defenseman at the time for some guy named Chris Kunitz, and the host of trade, he also netted, can you just throw in this, what's his name? Pascal Dupuis. Do you mind throwing him in as well? Oh, thanks a lot. And they gave up what turned out to be pretty much nothing in that deal. So Shero was great at going out and getting what he needed, but again, he was always working with a lot of assets. He had a team that had Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, all drafted before he took over, and always I think by his second year in the job, they were in the playoffs, and that was it. They never looked back. He was dealing from a contending position. So it'll be interesting to see, because you can't pin every draft pick on a general manager, but you can, he's still overseeing the picks, and Pittsburgh's draft picks, especially in the forward department, once Shero took over, were not as impressive. There was Jordan Staal in 2006, but after that, you look at Bo Bennett, and this team struggled to find a real gem of a forward. And what New Jersey needs most right now is a gem of a forward. And even Shero was quoted. He spoke on the conference call saying that he wants to help inject offense into this team. So I'm skeptical based on Shero's track record. If he, it's not that he's not effective, but the things that he's good at, I don't know if they're a match for the Devils. But at the same time, can you ever doubt Lou? I don't know if you can. You got to trust him, right?
Yeah, he's always found a way in the past. And you mentioned some of the deals Ray Shero made, and I've seen a couple of people comment on it. One of the things he made the most of was utilising the picks that they had. So obviously down the line, it did create them some problems replenishing the forwards on the farm because they'd moved all these picks up to bring guys into, quote, win now.
That's right.
It is a very different situation in New Jersey. I agree with you about the blue line. Schneider. I thought they rode him a little too hard early in the year, but you can kind of even that out over time. Maybe get a veteran backup in to give him some relief. But the forward lines it was a sorry state of affairs from the word go for me. I think the youngest guy was Adam Henrique at 29, something like that. And they had more guys above 30 than below it. And it just wasn't a pretty mix in my eyes. And that sounds like a strange term when you've got toothless guys knocking all hell out of each other. But it just wasn't a pretty lineup when you looked at it and you thought, well, Yago, he could be good for 60 points maybe. And there's a couple of other guys in there who can chip in. Henrique's one of them. But it wasn't a great mix. It wasn't a great blend in a pretty difficult Metropolitan division. And as you said, there's not a lot on the farm. And that may be the most concerning part that Ray Shero now has to address. He's got the defense for the next 5 to 10 years potentially, but you got to score goals too.
That's right, and at least he's got his work cut out for him. It's very clear what he has to do, but it'll be interesting to see, because to me it's very new territory for Ray. He hasn't taken over this type of operation before, a team that's starting from the beginning.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been. He was more of an augmenter than a rebuilder in Pittsburgh, right? So it's hard to say, but at the same time, I still think that Lou's going to have some, have the final say on hockey decisions. I believe over Ray, and there's good chemistry there with their USA Hockey connection. So they must know what they're doing, and the Devils over the last 20, 30 years have been one of the most successful franchises. They've only been struggling for a couple of years. They're only 3 years removed from being in the final. So their brain trust has always worked well for them, with Lou leading the way. So maybe he knows something we don't know, for anyone who's doubting Ray Shero.
Yeah, there was a tweet I saw. I think it was since Lamoriello became GM in 1987, the Devils had the second best record in the NHL over that span. That kind of speaks for itself, I think, for what Lamoriello's managed to do with that team. But one of the first tasks for Ray Shero, and probably in conjunction with, again, as we've said, with Lamoriello, is finding a coach. Inevitably, Dan Barlsma has been linked with the Devils, the Shero-Pittsburgh connection. Todd McClellan's apparently talked with Edmonton. You've still got Mike Babcock making a decision. I mean, the Devils are going to be an intriguing prospect for somebody to take over. Guy Boucher is apparently in talks with Toronto. How do you see the coaching situation shaking out, not just in New Jersey, but with all these other jobs that are up for grabs?
Oh, it's funny. Well, I've been saying in the office this year, I think this is the greatest free agent coaching class in the history of the NHL.
100%, yeah.
It's insane. I can't believe, and and that's not even including. You never know. Once the Bruins get a GM, you could see Claude Julien added to the mix as well.
Yep.
I can't remember a class with this many big names in play. Ken Hitchcock, and the list goes on and on. For the Devils, I think Balsam makes a lot of sense. Again, there's a USA Hockey connection, and obviously the Pittsburgh connection. If I'm a betting man, I think Bilesma would be the guy, but at the same time, he has the same issue to overcome that Shero overcame, because he inherited a team that won the Stanley Cup that year, and yes, it was largely because of what he did taking over for Michel Therrien. But if you take his team to the Stanley Cup, you also have a lot of talent on that team.
Yeah.
And he never got Pittsburgh back there again, right? So it's interesting. I think that Bilesma, he never truly struggled. I don't think Bilesma, he never missed the playoffs, so he does deserve another chance, just like Shero deserves another chance. But again, I think people should be cautiously optimistic if he's the guy. Another name I'm looking at is Ken Hitchcock. And, we don't know what the Blues are going to do yet. We don't know if Hitchcock is going to retire yet. He's hinted at that.
Yeah.
But I like him. I like Hitchcock for a team with a young core that's looking to get better, that's looking for some discipline. And he has a history, and his it's almost like his career is divided into two halves. And, he took Dallas to the Stanley Cup, and he got Philadelphia very close. But if you look at what he did in Columbus and St. Louis, Hitch's specialty was taking a young team with a lot of potential and helping mold it, helping getting it into that sort of relevancy and contendership. And yes, he couldn't get them out of the first or second round, but he did help a team get there, get to respectability. So, I personally think Hitchcock would be a great fit for Edmonton. It does seem like they're zeroing in on Todd McClellan instead. And if that's true, I wonder if Hitchcock would be an interesting fit for the Devils.
Yeah, and the other one mentioned there was like the young core, which I absolutely agree with. You look at, as you said, you look at what he did with Columbus and the Blues, is whether he would be a good fit for the Maple Leafs, because they've got a young core now. They're having a big clear out, a lot of younger guys coming through.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the Leafs, and I forgot about them because when I was writing last week about Hitchcock and how to be a good fit in Edmonton, and as soon as I finished, I thought, you know what? If this doesn't work out, the Leafs would be a good fit as well for the same reason. And they're going to be bringing in another very good young player in the draft. I'm thinking probably a Dylan Strome this year, maybe a Mitch Marner, maybe a Noah Hannafin if he falls to them at number 4. And you've got William Nylander, you've got a lot of young pieces. Morgan Riley, Jake Gardner's still young, and they do need a guy who is comfortable on a big stage. And Hitchcock is such an institution in the game over the last 20, 30 years. I think he'd be comfortable in a big market if he wanted to do it. And just someone who can bring just sort of discipline and accountability to a team that's been lacking that in recent years.
Yeah, and the other thing is if Hitchcock leaves the Blues, you've then got the Sharks and St. Louis looking for a new coach. And then we come a little bit back to what we were saying before about Dan Bilesma, who kind of came in to the table that Michel Therrien had set and then took them that extra mile. And you've got two tables which are, certainly St. Louis, the table is set. You just need that guy who can get them over the hump. And maybe that isn't Hitchcock. And you can see why people might feel that way after the last couple of years. But equally, San Jose have got a good team still.
Oh, the Blues. I always say the Blues, in terms of pure roster talent, to me on paper, they should be the most stacked team in the NHL. They're unbelievably deep at every position. And I don't know what it is, and I don't like to draw on intangibles, but it seems like something's missing. It seems like there's a mental barrier. And, I do think whether it's deserved or not, I do think it is time to move on from Hitchcock. And, the result has been the same, has been shockingly similar too many years in a row. I think it's 3 or 4 years in a row now. And the guy, I don't think he's been linked to them much yet, and I don't know if he'd have interest. But I like Mike Babcock as a potential St. Louis Blues coach. He's a guy who he likes taking on a high-profile team that has a lot of big names, and he's done it in Detroit, and he was comfortable managing Team Canada, and he proved he can make a lot of very talented, high-profile parts work together. And I wonder if St. Louis would be a good fit for him for that reason.
The Babcock thing, as mentioned, it's still kind of up in the air. He said he needed to talk to his family, which is understandable because with kids and things, you're going to move clubs, you move the whole family to a whole new city. So, but a lot has been made out of the money element that Babcock wants to push the envelope, not just for himself, but for other coaches. But as you said, the Blues offer an intriguing situation. This is a team almost ready to win. It just needs that guy. And, would he be willing to accept, let's say, less than he might get from a Buffalo or a Toronto who could offer him all the money in the world, effectively, because he would have that chance to win with the Blues?
Well, it's a good question, and I forget who said it, but I heard last week, and I liked the quote that Babcock, you look at the sort of the legends of the game and people that were so highly regarded, and whether it's fair or not, people mention Scotty Bowman in the same breath as Mike Babcock, and people say Scotty Bowman wasn't just a great coach, but he always knew where to go. He didn't inherit, but he chose great situations. And Babcock, after Anaheim, he knew what he was getting into with the talented Detroit team, and he took them to the Stanley Cup in 2008. So I do think that it's possible we'll see Babcock not just take where where he'd find the most money, but go somewhere where he thinks it's a good fit and where he can win. So I wouldn't rule out a team like St. Louis for that exact reason. That said, if I'm a betting man, I still think that I'd put my money on Babcock staying in Detroit. I think there's only two possibilities to coach the Detroit Red Wings next year. One of them is Mike Babcock. The other one is Jeff Blashill. They're coaching Grand Rapids.
Yeah, and the longer it goes on, the more I kind of think he will stay in Detroit as well. Because, again, he's settled there, his family's settled there. He's still got a good thing going on. That team has still got talent, guys like Thomas Tatar coming through. Peter Mrazek had a couple of great performances. There's talent in the wing system that he can bring through. I know we've had the stuff this week with Anthony Mantha, but it's a good situation still to be in Detroit. It's not like this team is suddenly uncompetitive.
Well, it's true, and that was one thing that Babcock said after the elimination during his sort of exit presser that was surprising. And, he was referring to the likes of Pavel Datsyuk when he said we're not getting any younger. But the funny thing is Detroit is getting younger. It's actually quite a factually incorrect statement. The Red Wings their farm system is the best it's been in years. And you look at guys like Anthony Mantha, who's, it's hard to say. Some people think that he's going to be a bust, but he still has a lot of potential as an elite goal scorer. And people are very excited about Dylan Larkin, a guy with a great last name, is from one Larkin to another. But he's sort of profiles as a Ryan Kessler type of player, a do-it-all center. And you look at Timu Pulkkinen, and people love his shot. In the system, they compare his shot to Brett Hull's. That's how good his one-timer is. They got and of course, Peter Mrazek, I've loved him since he was a junior in Ottawa. Tom Tatar, Gustav Nyquist, they found could end up being their next Datsyuk and Zetterberg down the road, those sort of late-round gems. And Riley Sheehan as well. So this team is a lot of young talent, more than it has in a long time.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Matt, we're running out of time for this week's show. Thank you very much again for joining this week. Where can people find you online, on Twitter and so forth?
Thanks, Rob. You can find me at THN Matt Larkin, and you can send me trolls and make fun of my hair.
Well, thanks again for joining me today, Matt. You can follow me on Twitter at RobMcGregor35. You can find the blog, onepuckshort.wordpress.com. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/onepuckshort. If you want to get in touch and ask any questions, pass on any thoughts about the NHL or any other aspects of the game, you can also email onepuckshort@gmail.com. Thanks again to my guest today, Matt Larkin. I'll speak to you all again very soon.